बस हो गया, आप हो गए और
मेरी देवरानी है हस्बैंड और बेटा घर पे ही है।
तो वो घर पे ही है। अच्छा, कोई दिक्कत तो नहीं यहाँ पे? ओके, जल्दी आप कैरी ऑन। हमारे यहाँ आया था इधर विजिट पे, तो आपको तो सब चीज़ पता ही है, रोज इसके रिपोर्ट मिलते हैं हमारे बात होती है। आने वाली तो आके देखने में आ सकते हैं।
वीडियो कॉल पे सब देखते रहते हैं आजकल के।
आप कुछ करिए ना।
थैंक यू।
ये सर वैसे ही डुप्लीकेट है।
सर दर्द हो गया था, दो पहन के।
धूप में कहाँ है?
दो पहन के उतार के रख दिए।
अच्छा, हाँ। कान में भी दर्द हो जाता है डबल पैन बिल्कुल भी। एक सैनिटाइजर पॉकेट वाला रख लो, बार बार करते रहो।
उसी चला रहा ना, डेस्कटॉप से चला रहा ना, डेस्कटॉप से कनेक्ट किया।
ठीक है, बस यही था सचिन जी, कोई चल नहीं रहा था। मिसलीस को बुलाए,
मिसलीस आया होगा ना, सुबह नहीं आया?
कहाँ है?
सुबह आया, वीसी कराया।
तो बुलाना चाहिए था, बुलाना चाहिए था उसको।
फोन करूँ क्या?
ये तो हो गया, पूछो रिक्वायर है तो बुला।
क्यों यू रिक्वायर्ड मिसलीस? कैमरा तो ऑन नहीं है सर, ये तो स्ट्रेट होगा तभी तो जाएगा फोटो।
लॉजिक का होगा और ये ऑटो सेंस करता है, जब आपकी मीटिंग ज्वाइन हो जाती है उसके बाद
होता है, आप देख लो।
पूछ रहे हैं, आ जाए।
अच्छा एक मिनट रुको, मैं ज्वाइन कराना 4
आ जाए अभी,
हो गया
4 बजे का टाइम।
जस्ट स्टार्ट करेंगे।
ड्रॉ ज्वाइन कर ले, 5 मिनट बुला रहे, पहले ज्वाइन कर ले तब लोग कनेक्ट हो जाए। उनको बुला लो, डॉक्टर
मैसेज कर दी।
कर दिया। मिनिस्टर को तभी बुलाऊंगा ना जब वहाँ जाएंगे। कोई कनेक्ट हुआ, चेक कर लिया माइक वाइक? एसी नहीं चलेगा? एसी की जरूरत नहीं है क्या?
एसी तो नहीं चला तो सही है, बल्कि
हैं? फोटोग्राफर नहीं है क्यों? बुला लो।
हाँ बुला लो।
नहीं, वो और डॉक्टर और फिर आ जाए ना, मिनिस्टर सर आ रहे हैं?
हाँ। हेलो, कभी कभी ठीक ठीक।
आ रहे?
रास्ते में निकल चुके ऑफिस से।
ऑफिस क्या ऊपर ही तो बैठते हैं? ऊपर ही बैठते, कहीं और बैठते हैं?
ऊपर ही बैठते हैं, फिफ्थ फ्लोर पे।
अच्छा, मैंने कहा कहीं दूर बैठते हैं। ये चेक कर लिया, इसका साउंड वाला चेक कर लेते हैं, माइक वाइक। मतलब कोई प्रॉब्लम तो नहीं होगी? वो बोले आवाज
होती नहीं है, अब अचानक हो जाए रनिंग में तो फिर अलग बात है।
नहीं, मैं इसलिए कह रहा हूँ ना, कभी कभी हो जाती है कि आवाज जाती नहीं है।
वो तो रनिंग में भी हो जाती है, कई बार रिस्टार्ट करना पड़ता है बस।
हाय, गुड आफ्टरनून सर। हाय।
I'm okay to be here?
हाँ
वैसे ही ज्वाइन हो, मुझे बता देना, मैंने वहाँ बताना है सर को।
ओके,
ठीक है सर, पूछ लो।
स्टार्ट होने वाला,
स्टार्ट हो, बुला लो।
बुला लो फिर।
हाँ बुला लो।
स्टार्ट होने वाला है।
हाँ।
Or all of you?
Fine sir, we are
Family is fine?
fine sir.
Keep well, huh? Sir, easy.
Easy. So you will be comfortable there, here. There it's fine, no?
Actually, I want to move there because the microphone is here.
He's okay with
But this is for this camera.
Okay. Sir will be coming, okay sir?
Wherever you put me, I'm okay. No problem with me.
So we are informing sir, he will just okay.
It's so sad. It's not an
welcome distinguished delegates to today's Member State information session on COVID-19. As always, it's my pleasure to introduce the Director General, Dr. Tedros, for his welcome remarks. Over to you, DG.
Thank you, Tim. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all Member States, and thank you for joining us once again. This Saturday marks the one-year anniversary of the launching of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. Tomorrow, we will hold a special press conference involving the principals of all the partners in the ACT Accelerator. As you know, the ACT Accelerator was conceived with two major objectives: rapid development of vaccines, diagnostics and therapeutics, and equitable access to those tools. The first objective has been achieved. We have several safe and effective vaccines to prevent COVID-19. We have rapid diagnostics to test it, and we have oxygen and dexamethasone to treat it. But as we see all over the world, whether or not people benefit from these tools depends on where they live, who they are, and what they earn. Our urgent task now is to urgently expand equitable access to all the tools needed to stop infections and save lives. And yet, far from celebrating victory over the pandemic, new infections have been climbing for 8 straight weeks, and deaths have increased for 5 weeks. Last week, more than 5.2 million cases of COVID-19 were reported, the most in a single week so far, and more than 3 million people have now lost their lives. It took 9 months for the virus to kill 1 million people, 4 months to reach 2 million, and just 3 months to reach 3 million. Infections and hospitalizations among people aged 25 to 59 are increasing at an alarming rate, probably as the result of highly transmissible variants and increased social mixing. My colleagues, I know that many of your populations are fed up with public health measures that have restricted many parts of life. We all are. But they work. They save lives. Vaccines are giving us all hope. But vaccines alone will not end the pandemic. We have the tools to bring this pandemic under control in a matter of months, but only if we use those tools consistently and equitably. On Monday, the Emergency Committee gave me its advice on vaccines, variants, international travel, and other issues. Its full statement is available on our website. Developing life-saving tools is one thing, but they don't deliver themselves. Since the beginning of the pandemic, WHO's logistics team has played a vital role in delivering essential medical supplies all over the world through the Supply Chain Task Force, which WHO co-chairs with the World Food Programme. So far, the task force has coordinated the procurement and delivery of $1.2 billion of essential supplies to support COVID-19 response efforts in 193 countries. As of mid-March, that includes more than 67 million diagnostic tests, 1.1 billion units of personal protective equipment, and 2.4 million critical biomedical items such as oxygen concentrators, ventilators, and other equipment. The head of our logistics team Paul Molinaro will give you more detail shortly. To fund all of this work, we rely on the generosity of donors. 2 months ago, WHO launched our strategic preparedness and response plan for 2021, which included an appeal for $1.96 billion US, almost $2 billion US. So far, only 30% of the SPRP is funded. We have received pledges for an additional $400 million US, which would bring up to 50%. We're very grateful to member states and other donors for your generosity, but we have a challenge. Nearly all of this funding is earmarked. As you know, we are in a fast-moving response environment. We need flexibility and cannot afford to be hobbled by overly restricted funding. The SPRP appeal campaign, which includes WHO's work through the ACT Accelerator, is now entering its next phase. $1.2 billion of the SPRP is for WHO's work through the ACT Accelerator, of which we have received 10% to date. We are updating our appeal document and will be sharing it with you soon. We will also present more detail on WHO's work under the ACT Accelerator. Finally, tomorrow we begin an exciting project, the Global Youth Mobilization, through which young people around the world can apply for grants of between $500 and $5,000 to support innovative local solutions to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Global Youth Mobilization has been established in partnership with the 6 largest youth development organizations in the world and supported by the Solidarity Response Fund. To kick off the Global Youth Mobilization, we will hold a Global Youth Summit from tomorrow until Sunday. Excellencies, as always, we're grateful for your support and we look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you so much. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, DG. Now my pleasure to introduce the first of 2 items today, the first item being a technical and epidemiological update. We will then have a round of question and answers. For the second item, an update on the ACT Accelerator and COVAX. And today I'd like to introduce Dr. Sose Fal, Assistant Director General for Emergency Response, to provide the introduction to the technical epi update. Sose, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to give a short introduction in French, so just to give the time for members there to put the earphone. Sur le plan épidémiologique, comme
So, when it comes to epidemiology, as Vardhan has just said, we're in a very active phase of this pandemic, and over the last 8 weeks, we've seen consecutive rises in infection rates. And last week, we saw the highest peak since the beginning of the pandemic, with over 5,230,000 cases in all 5 regions of the WHO. We're seeing continued rises in Europe. There was a slight decrease over the last week. And in a situation in which variants are replacing the original virus, we need to strengthen our sanitary measures, and we need to put in place integrated measures besides just vaccines. We need to have social and public health measures in place. Southeast Asia saw a sharp rise in cases recently. We're working with these regions and those countries to control the situation. today my presentation will be on the global COVID-19 supply system and for other epidemics as well. You ought to recall in this context that before the pandemic in 2019, as part of our transformation agenda launched by the Director General, we created a new department called Strategic Health Operations. This is by Mr. Yaraki here. This was a very important department in charge of the global supply system, and without this department, we would be in a very difficult situation throughout this pandemic. And when COVID-19 was characterized as a pandemic in March 2020, the OMS was already responding to over 330 public health situations, which over 50 were classified as emergencies. And that's why it is important that the WHO be able to respond to a number of different situations and humanitarian crises. So we're going to hear about how we were able to react quickly to coordinate the global fund for the supply chain, given that the global market was in chaos with air routes and sea routes interrupted. We needed to ensure equality of access when it comes to diagnostics, access to oxygen, life-saving oxygen, as well as personal protective equipment to protect our healthcare workers. This is not just an issue of distribution. We also need to work on pre-qualification, on product profiles. You have to identify and approve and select these products in an equitable process. This is why this presentation will be so important. I will now give the floor to Paul. Thank you.
Merci Sosin. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Just now go into a little bit brief on what happened and how we got there and where, to a degree, where we think we're going with the mechanism and platform that we had initially set up to conduct the initial response to COVID. So I'll go through briefly a few slides, and then obviously happy to take questions afterwards. So a little bit of background on where we came from, and really how we were positioned to be able to undertake some limited activities to be able to conduct COVID response. And it's really coming out of the lessons learned from the West Africa Ebola outbreak. Establishment of the health emergencies program, and within that the various different operational elements that needed to be put in place to support any response. And this was really refined 2018, 2020 through the more extensive support that needed to be given for the large Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly in North Kivu, which required a more sustained support mechanism, including end-to-end supply provision, and particularly of PPE, of diagnostics, and of unlicensed vaccine that was being used at the time, and the requisite cold chain that needed to go around that. And through that was really building up that capacity and experience, where we were hoping at the end of that campaign to get a chance to take stock and make improvements. We moved straight in to this large COVID response. Again, just turning the clock back, I think Sosi has alluded to some of the challenges that were faced with this one. Obviously, with the COVID response, one of the things we were not prepared for was just the scale and the number of countries that were affected, the speed of which the epidemic evolved into a pandemic. And then reactions, particularly amongst industry, disruptions to trade, to air cargo, border closures, and all of those associated problems that came as a result of that huge spike in demand and the very real risks of continued transmission of the virus. And so adding those together, having just this large amount of demand, large proportion of fear, panic, and the disruption to what would be our normal industrial base and transport mechanisms really had to push us to think about a response in a different way. So what we did is we stepped up to put into place the coordination and response mechanisms really amongst a number of our traditional response partners such as WFP, UNHCR and UNICEF, at least to be able to conduct an initial response as far back as February, and then widen that group as we start to understand a little bit more about how the operation needed to unfold. And what you see here is really just a timeline of those key events from January to May. And these timelines are included in the report. I believe has already been circulated, the full report. If not, it should be with you this week. It's really the assessment of the overall COVID-19 supply chain system response, and there's a lot of detail and information in there. It's important to note in this, particularly this period between January and May, what I would say is that first of all, it was very difficult in terms of what we didn't know then and what we know now, including how the virus transmits, certainly with issues around the correct diagnostic tests, what would be the requirement for clinical care, what kind of equipment would be needed, and where would bottlenecks in the market take place. This all required, to a degree, a bit of seeing through the crystal ball, being prepared to take risk, but also at the same time being able to move very quickly, and at least in a calculated way based on the information we were getting from the technical experts and the scientists, which would give us an indication of whether we should be jumping left or right, and where and at what speed. And through the setup of this mechanism, we were still at least being able to conduct, albeit in limited quantities, in a limited way, particularly between ourselves in WHO and our colleagues in UNICEF, based on PPE stocks we already held collectively, and at the same time able to move small amounts of new test assays without necessarily the extraction kits, but move considerable quantities through a number of countries in the world in order at least to be able to identify if cases were being imported. And so it was important that we kept that machinery running very, very quickly after the announcement of the public health emergency of international concern. Ultimately, particularly in the first 6 months, the combined CSCS system, and this is really talking about products being moved through multiple channels, through 12 reporting partners, was responsible for a large proportion of PPE, biomedical equipment, and particularly diagnostics that were moved to countries. Some of this data, where we have data missing, is particularly private sector to private sector movements, which we're not necessarily able to capture. But it does show that the effort did contribute fundamentally to the global response in terms of being able to mobilize access and move, particularly during a time where movement was difficult, key products to countries. Again, I won't dwell on this because it is in the report. I think it has been presented on a previous occasion, just in terms of the number. As DG mentioned, the $1.1 billion worth of supplies moved. That was a number taken from the analysis done at the end of the year. So really we're saying that was the 2020 numbers. We do continue to receive demand collectively. We do continue to ship product, diagnostics, biomedical equipment, and PPE based on demands that we get as WHO and that some of the other reporting partners are received. So all of the volume of demand has gone down and countries are finding other mechanisms to use. There is still demand and operational support that is being fulfilled by the initial response mechanism that was set up. We go a little bit into the report, sort of the key lessons learned from that. And it's really looking at the acknowledgement that the rapid response of supplies in the first weeks was critical. And that we do need to collectively look and expand preparedness efforts, particularly in the case of a novel virus where really being able to mobilize quickly, even if it's limited stocks and equipment, it may have the effect of buying time and being able to support activities that prevent a further and wider outbreak. Speed of access, again, what the report had mentioned was that the initial 3 months was very quick, but as the sheer number of countries and the demand numbers were going up, at the same time, further challenges in the market were prevailing. It became difficult to maintain a steady and fast response the wider it got and the larger the scale-up and mechanism needed to be. Other element that's worth bearing note is it was always assumed this would be a multi-channel response, i.e. will not be a single agency or two or three, but multiple actors trying to access the market. And really the important to note is to coordinate that multi-channel approach is a challenge, and certainly we succeeded to a certain degree, but certainly there are lessons to be learned in setting up a future mechanism. The other area we certainly want to work on is around data transparency. Just receiving demand, procurement, delivery data from 12 partners, and 12 partners who are close working partners to WHO traditionally, is a challenge in terms of the format, the frequency, the structure, the data cleaning, and it's obviously something we think moving forward as a recommendation should be put in place in advance of operations. And other recommendations, particularly around team resources. This showed clearly that the need for different skills, particularly in the types of market that we were having to deal with and how the markets were reacting, and then a whole slew of recommendations around the operations guidance and leadership coordination mechanisms that do need to be put in place, including regionalization of procurement and manufacturing, which I think is becoming more evident and quite a hot topic recently. So just to start towards the end, and really how the report is looking is to distinguish for the future the need to have a 4 to 6 month rapid response mechanism that is able to acquire, move, and deliver critical supplies in response to a large public health event. And then beyond that time becomes really about widening access to critical supply markets, driving down price. Obviously, if it's a novel virus requiring novel products, there's a research and development element that needs to go in. And it's important going forward to note there is a thing to distinguish between those two operational mechanisms because they do require different types of partnership and different mechanisms to be And this is just to reinforce that message, and it's certainly something that has come across from the report, is really what do we need to do in terms of ensuring that preparation activities to be able to conduct 4 to 6 months initial response. And that's really around strategic inventory sharing, continued dialogue with key industries, a playbook that really assigns roles and responsibilities in advance of a major event, and the financial and volume guarantee mechanisms that should be in place for future response. And then really maximizing access, and this is going beyond the initial response. It's transparency and agreement around country needs, allocation mechanisms, being able to coordinate supply chain actors, and that's from requisition to delivery. Being able to provide updated pandemic markets transparency, so particularly where key industries do have issues and where there is severe constraint, to be able to pull data that can be disseminated widely and that countries can use to set their own access and supply chain strategies around. And then finally, the leadership for the global response. But the goal setting, how close that leadership should be to the collective response and to the epidemiology is something that will be worth discussion going forward. And just to use as an illustration on where one, or an example on how these two can interact, I give the example right now of oxygen. Also a hot button issue at the moment. If you look in our rapid response phase, and certainly the work we were doing through the biomedical consortia was really around acquisition and delivery of equipment. And that's oxygen delivery equipment and generation to limited degree for oxygen concentrators, ventilators, CPAP masks, and the equipment needed to transfer oxygen to a patient. That has now evolved to a more comprehensive tech support modality as oxygen scale-up. And so far that's requiring a lot more rigorous and much longer discussion around the technical support needed for larger oxygen generation projects such as PSA plants and other industrial use oxygen. And really here bringing together clinicians, biomedical engineers, and logistics and supply people to be able to look at how to address some of these issues. And how that's maybe manifesting itself right now is with the Global Fund funding that's now being made available, is supporting countries and through our regions really being able for them to put up technically sound proposals for access to that financing around the need assessment and around the appropriate technical solution that needs to be in place, costed to fit each context. And so there you're looking at really a move from emergency response in delivery equipment now to something that has to go longer term around the solution to the actual provision of oxygen itself. And I think that just serves as an example conceptually of how we're looking at some of these issues going forward, the mechanisms that need to be in place to support that. I'll just end now with just on the last. It's really around our call to action, cross-cutting. It's really around, I think, the important notions for being able to establish a coherent and very fast response mechanism for future events is setting that operations playbook up, assigning roles, responsibilities, and how we would execute, creating the ecosystem, the digital ecosystem for operational but also market intelligence to be disseminated, makes the response more transparent, but also giving key critical strategic information for decision makers. Evidently the need to think on strategic stockpiling, including that we can hold some manufacturers to account. We did have, and I think this is a collective experience, a lot of purchase orders and contracts cancelled at the beginning of the pandemic. We need to think about this in a different way. And then finally, as an enabler, the financing models that can underpin some of this work, both in terms of preparedness investment, but really being able to access immediate funding if it's clear that an event is going to expand and requires a sustained and large response. So I'll leave it at that. I'll just hand over to my colleague Michelle Yao, perhaps just to say quick brief words on what we're currently underdoing internally for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon. Just learning from the COVID response as well as the Ebola response, we have started working on redesigning the operation support and logistic team. So this is to take into account how we can strengthen partnership as highlighted by Paul. It is also to work on a solution, an electronic solution that can back up market intelligence as well as support the demand mechanism as well as different stock management. The second point is also to learning from COVID to have a team in different areas, mainly what we call the health logistic in different operations, take into account also the quality control in some of the supply, the support to operation, including field operation as well as some of the components related to accommodation during operation. We are also working, ensuring that we build a strong network starting from country offices so that we can decentralize and reduce the burden, at least on HQ alone. Regional offices having also regional warehouse with a stock rotation mechanism from a global warehouse toward this regional component. So all this work to strengthen the team and make sure that we are ready for the next emergency is ongoing, and we will also take into account the review that is in process. So thank you very much. Back to Sosi.
Thank you very much, Sose, Paul and Michelle, for that presentation. Now, any questions or comments we have from member states? I'd like to invite Jude Osai to moderate the session. Jude, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. As is the practice, we would wait a few minutes or seconds to see if any member state would like to take the floor by raising their hand in the Zoom function, and then we'll do that. I recognize France. You have the floor, please.
Hello. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this extremely interesting presentations. It's extremely useful in this phase in which we're drawing the lessons learned from the crisis, and we're strengthening our response to emergency situations. This presentation has been extremely timely because we need to understand how we operationalize our rapid response systems in the midst of a health crisis. We know that the first few days of response are absolutely essential, and we need to have the wherewithal to respond. So thank you so much for this very well-presented bird's-eye view. I have a couple of questions. Please forgive me if they seem rather simplistic. The first question regarding the list of agencies that have been mobilized. I think that the 12 agencies, including the WHO, were listed in one of the slides. Could you confirm this? And further, who ultimately decides what these organizations are that are around the table, and do they have a collective vocation to expand and grow over time? And the second main question, which might even seem more trivial, has to do with the link between the ACT mechanism and the different other supply mechanisms that cover diagnostics and vaccine treatments. The measures that you carried out regarding the first 4 months or first 100 days that you mentioned, has this afterwards been fed into the ACT accelerator, or are we talking about two complementary mechanisms, or are they running in parallel? Once again, thank you so much, and thanks for all your work.
Thank you very much. First, I should now invite Canada. You have the floor, please.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much, Paul and Michelle, for that. We haven't looked at the report yet, but I know there will be a lot of interest across many parts of the government of Canada, so we look forward to looking at that and coming back with any questions that we may have. And so Bill described how your vision within WHO has evolved since what happened with Ebola and how it's grown, and now COVID. Could you speak a little to how that standing capacity should look like? WHO's own standing capacity. We're not always in a full pandemic, but you have to be able to do this. Standing capacity looks like. Coordination with others in an ongoing way. So you've had the supply chain system, you're reflecting on that, but what does that look like going forward in terms of ongoing coordination? Do you need to change and reinforce pre-existing systems? Pre-COVID, do you have to develop new systems? If you could speak a little bit to that, that would be super, super helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Canada. I didn't see any further requests for the floor, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you to France and Canada for those questions. I'd like to hand the floor to Sose to take up the response and coordinate any response amongst the team. Thanks, Sose.
Thank you so much. I'll start by responding to France's questions. They're extremely important. The first regarding the list of agencies that have been mobilized. When we looked at the situation and saw that the crisis could evolve extremely quickly at a pandemic level, and the risk for the weakest countries if they didn't have access to these products, we started with the UN system. We created a task force by our DG and Dr. Tedros, and this task force was co-chaired by WHO and the World Food Programme. And then we mobilized all UN agencies within this task force. It wasn't a work that was limited to the UN agencies in scope, because we had other pillars as well that looked at humanitarian concerns, and there we worked with OCHA and others, which allowed us to provide fair access and supply, especially to the most hard-hit country. We're talking about over 1,800,000 people, 800 million people. So through this system, we managed to coordinate our work. We also used the health cluster to be able to liaise with more than 900 partners in the different countries that are most affected. So there are concentric circles, but on the whole, it's a very open mechanism. Now, the relationship with the ACT Accelerator, this mechanism was a forerunner to the ACT Accelerator, and we continue to work with ACT, and our emergency staff has completely integrated their efforts with those of the ACT Accelerator. And if you look, it results in the new SDRP, and all these pillars are integrated in a single budgetary document, and that's the document that the DG just presented. We wanted to integrate everything so that we could respond to health emergencies from from all angles, and we've continued to work in that direction with the same framework for response. And now I think I'm going to give the floor to Michel and others for the response, to respond to Candace's question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. So, I want to start by trying to answer the question, what is WHO's structure? What has it set up? Well, when it comes to emergency situations, WHO wants to make sure that we get sufficient incoming supplies to provide a proper public health response so that it's available to member states. So we have worked with a certain amount of decentralization. We do have some focal points in our country offices that can help countries to better structure their demand so they can be better prepared for emergencies by positioning themselves with incoming supplies and medicines. And then we also work at a regional level. This regional level allows us to effectively bring together the different levels of demand, and then once again to position ourselves at a regional level this time with respect to the incoming supplies so that they can be sent quickly to the different countries to respond to emergencies. And then at the level of headquarters, what we try to do there is look at the agreements we have with our different partners. And at this level, we evaluate the market situation and the sort of partnerships that can be rolled out with different organizations that could help to respond to emergencies in practical terms. What this means is that we have clear coordination when it comes to humanitarian matters, especially when it comes to the logistics cluster. The idea here is to avoid duplication. So we have different coordination groups that allow us to consolidate what's incoming down the pipeline, what are our outgoings to different countries, so that we can clearly identify potential gaps. So these efforts, that coordination will have to continue, and they're also carried out at country level and at the regional level, as well as at headquarters. So that's a bird's eye view of the different mechanisms that we have. Right now we're working on the staff model that we need to be able to cover these mandates. We do have the WHO's comparative advantage when it comes to technical expertise. We can definitely provide technical support when it comes to treatment structures and the plans to roll out treatment setups, be it for Ebola, cholera, and the support for vaccination. Currently, we have many different vaccines being rolled out with respect to Ebola, and we're working very closely with other agencies in that regard. Thank you, Michel. And just to flesh that out a little bit, as I was saying, it's not just a matter of distributing product. We're talking about technical know-how, standards, also quality control, identification and selection of the best products. But above and beyond all that, we also try to look at the conditions in which the different epidemics are addressed. We've developed standards for treatment centers, for example. So all of these are aspects that need to be borne in mind, and we need to work to strengthen the global supply system, both when it comes to preparation and response to emergencies. And we have Dr. Mike Brown, who's connected and wanted to step in on this also. Thank you.
Merci, Susie. Thank you all. And I just, in terms of the questions being asked by the member states, importantly, I think that we need to recognise the role that many of our UN colleagues and partners have played in this response. I've been the UN Crisis Manager appointed by Dr. Tedros and the ESG as part of the UN Crisis Management Team. The COVID Supply Chain Mechanism has operated as a subgroup of that, and the level of integration and the level of cooperation, coordination and information sharing between UN agencies in this response is unprecedented in terms of the level of cooperation through the whole system at global, at regional and at country level. And we thank our partners, we thank the humanitarian coordinators, the resident coordinators, our country representatives at country level who've come together to support member states, not only in the science, the technical and the operational, but also in the supply chain management. Jose said something very important. When the supply chain system broke last year, it wasn't just a procurement issue. It wasn't a distribution issue. It was everything. Raw materials. It was about production. It was about financing. It was about procurement. It was about distribution. It was about deployment. It was about training for the use of these materials that were being distributed. Sending ventilators and oxygen concentrators to countries where people may not have the capacity to use them is as dangerous as not sending anything. So there's a huge amount of capacity building and facilitation and capacitation that needs to go with logistics. Sending materials and boxing things up and sending them and forgetting what you sent is just not acceptable in the modern world. So you have to go end to end. You have to provide a solution that's end to end. So the user is receiving material that is high quality, pre-tested, and they have the training and capacity to use that safely to save lives. That is what WHO does. We are not in itself a logistics agency. We bring coordination, we bring quality, we bring predictability, and we bring the will of the member states that the member state, the country that is responding to the outbreak remains at the centre of that process. It creates the demand. It drives the procurement. It asks for the material that it needs. And we work on your behalf to deliver that on time when we can, and to do that within the resources that we have. Clearly, and Jose outlined it again, we need to move forward. Paul said it. There are lessons to be learned here. But we have the core of what could be a much better system for the future. We need to bring in other partners. We've engaged with the private sector through the pandemic supply chain network, which was created well before the pandemic. We recognise the need to engage the private sector, major corporations, and we do need to continue that public-private collaboration to ensure that these supplies are available on an equitable basis. This system, in the height of the pandemic, was delivering over half of the supplies that were getting out into many of the countries in which you are. It provided a vital stopgap at a very, very important time in the pandemic. The ACT Accelerator now continues to deliver and expand on that, and we will continue to support the delivery of diagnostics, equipment, therapeutics and vaccines through that system. We have lessons to learn and things to improve, but I do believe that the UN system has worked together like never before. And I believe we have the basis to build a stronger system for the future. I hope that we can work with you all, and we thank you and our collaborating centres and all of your institutions for the work and the support and the inputs you've made, and importantly for the funding that you gave that made this possible. There are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars provided by you to support this process last year, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, colleagues, for your response to those questions. It's now my pleasure to introduce the second agenda item for today. This is an update on the ACT Accelerator and COVAX. We have an overview of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, supply guidance and operations with 5 speakers. My pleasure now to introduce the first speaker for today is Dr. Usman Mushtaq, Project Officer with the ACT Day Hub. Usman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished delegates. We'll start this segment with a quick brief about the upcoming key events over the next month for the ACT Accelerator. As you know, there will be a busy few weeks with a lot of important activity. Next slide. Next slide. So tomorrow, the DG will host an event marking 1 year since the launch of ACT Accelerator. I will come back with some more information on that. Starting this weekend, there will be the World Immunization Week, and with the theme of bringing us vaccines, bringing us closer. As much as the focus, rightly so, is on vaccine production, this week's main agenda is to bring more attention to the trust in vaccine as effective tools of combating disease, including COVID-19. Following from that, on 5th and 12th of May, we'll have the Facilitation Council Technical Pre-Brief and the ACT Council. I'll also give some more details on that. And then on 21st of May, as you might know, the G20-led Global Health Summit will take place, hosted by His Excellency Prime Minister of Italy. And it will be a key event and, of course, have much relevance for the ACT Accelerator. And at the end of the month, obviously, we'll have the World Health Assembly. Next slide. So the ACT A one-year event is mainly aimed at increasing and amplifying the public and political awareness for the ACT A's progress, but also, as mentioned here earlier, the challenges and the needs that we have, and furthermore promoting the ongoing financial appeal that is led by Norway and South Africa, which are the co-chairs. The run-up show is fairly straightforward. There is a head of state segment with multiple heads of states, and we will after that have a principal segment with media Q&A with ACT principals. It's important to note that delegations can follow the live stream and submit questions, and we will share the link with the slide that is from this meeting. Next slide. And then just a brief overview of what's to be expected from the Facilitation Council, which will take place on 12th of May. It will be a week before. There will be a technical pre-briefing also for delegations. The main agenda will be focused on the Health Systems Connector. And for the Council itself, it will also focus on the Health Systems Connector, but then we'll also hear an update from the COVAX Task Force on expanding vaccine production, which was also highlighted in the previous Facilitation Council. The links to where delegations can register for the technical pre-briefing will be provided, and where the Facilitation Council will be live streamed will also be provided. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you very much for that update, Usman. Now, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, who is known very well to you all today. Soumya, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Your Excellencies. I want to give a brief overview of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and touch a little bit on the new vaccine manufacturing task force, and then my colleagues will continue. So as you can see from this slide, it is quite amazing that we have almost 1 billion doses of vaccine that have been administered to people around the world across 205 countries, areas, territories, and economies, considering that it's been only 4 months since the first country started vaccinating. This is really an incredible global achievement. Next slide. There are 15 economies that have not yet started vaccinating, and if you look at just the 194 member states of WHO, 179 have started, and at least one more will start in the following days, leaving about 14 member states, which have not started for one reason or another. And you can see the distribution of those member states in this graphic. Again, very encouraging that the majority of member states have started vaccinating, but as the DG often likes to remind us, starting vaccination doesn't really mean that we are getting to the goal of vaccinating the most vulnerable and the most at-risk groups. Next slide, please. As far as the COVAX is concerned, we have shipped about almost 41 million doses to 117 participants, and the yellow color actually shows those who received COVAX doses, though they may have received other doses, from other sources as well. So a large part of the world again receiving COVAX doses across all regions. Next. Now this is a figure that keeps changing, so we just wanted to show this to show that of the 11 or so vaccines that are currently in use, the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer products are the most prevalent. And in fact, since we last showed you these data, 23 more participating economies and countries have started using the AstraZeneca vaccine, despite all of the discussions that have happened about the safety concerns, which we will come to a little bit later. So the good thing is that this is, I think, over a large number of millions of doses have been used, and we have more and more experience with this vaccine, as well as with some of the others. Next. So our aim was to get 237 million doses out to 142 participants, and that's how the February to May allocations were done. That was the anticipated supply. The current status is, as you can see, much less than what was expected, about 30 million doses from SII to 47 participants and about 10 million to 68 participants from the SK Bio site. You can click again. Of course, we also had a small volume from Pfizer. Those were the early doses, which just about 0.9 million that went out to 14 participants. So there's quite a large balance really that we would need to catch up by May. Next slide. But there are issues. The SK Bio site had several problems with initially really meeting up with the packaging and transporting of these doses, the supply chain issues. That's been now more or less settled. So we do expect that they will deliver the balance of doses in 2 shipments in late April and in late May. So that's about 68 million doses, going to an additional 14 participants. Pfizer aims to complete the remaining 0.3 million doses to about 4 participants very soon in the coming weeks, and then start the next 47 countries, which is about 14 million doses from Pfizer that will be going to 47 countries. With Serum Institute of India, it's a little bit of uncertainty right now, and I can speak a little bit about the different options that we are exploring. Next. So as you can see, the supplies to COVAX are less than anticipated, and that is affecting how much we are able to distribute. Obviously, unless we get volumes into COVAX, we can't then send them out. So instead of doing by now, say 100 million doses, we've only done 40 million. It's a challenge. So these are some of the steps we're taking. On SII, we're working with the government of India on the supply over the coming months to try and get more visibility on that. Obviously, the domestic needs in India have become very urgent over the past few weeks. In working with SK Bio to accelerate the release rollout, as well as looking at the target territories and whether those could be modified and adapted a little bit to make up for the SII doses. We're also working very closely with the products that we expect will have EUL and that would come through to COVAX, particularly the Johnson & Johnson product and the Novavax a little further down the road. We're also pursuing donations of vaccines that have received the WHO emergency use listing, and we're very thankful to New Zealand and France for being the first 2 countries to really come forward and announce their donation program to COVAX. And I think more of such donations could actually go a long way, particularly in bridging the immediate gaps that we have over the next coming weeks. We're also working, and Dr. Mary Angela will speak to the expedited review of new products, Sinopharm, Sinovac, Gamaleya, but also working with encouraging Novavax and others. And we have some new products that have expressed an interest. And then the global manufacturing capacity, really we need increased supplies. That is a critical issue. Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we doing about the manufacturing supply? I think we've touched upon this a little bit in the past about the need to unlock additional COVID vaccine supply by addressing bottlenecks, immediate bottlenecks, raw materials, fill and finish, increasing the number of facilities that can either make the raw material or the drug product or do the fill and finish, but also exploring longer term solutions. And I want to bring your attention to a call for expressions of interest that WHO put out last week, on Friday last week, to establish mRNA vaccine technology transfer hubs. And this will then be followed by other technologies, but we're focusing on mRNA to begin with. Next slide, please. We spoke about this earlier, the COVID vaccine manufacturing capacity task force that was set up with the partners looking at immediate, so the pillar 1 and the pillar 2 are looking at immediate and short-term responses, and these are led by CEPI and Gavi, whereas the longer-term approach to building capacity, especially in LMICs, through a multilateral tech transfer mechanism that's being led by WHO. Next. And the approach really is to envision a global network of one or more technology transfer hubs that would then have all of the capacity from academics, from companies that have the technology, the IP holders, the member states. So we expect that those who can share the technology and who have the know-how and who have the IP will come forward to bring this into a tech transfer hub. And of course we need to discuss, and it will have to be done on a bilateral discussion basis on where and how and when these technology transfer hubs are set up, ideally in a LMIC, but it could be otherwise. And then we would have to go through a process of selecting the recipients, which would be in LMICs, and these recipients would be selected on certain criteria that we are working on, and we will make those available. Those criteria obviously will look at the existing capacity in the country, the regulatory environment, and other essential things that are needed for a good ecosystem in order to have a sustainable manufacturing capacity built up there. And the idea will be to take this technology and build up the capacity to start making COVID vaccines, but eventually to then have this capacity to manufacture other vaccines to build up regional health security, both for pandemics as well as in between pandemics. The facility would need to be used on an ongoing basis, and therefore there needs a sustainable business model and business plan that would need to be developed for this. So this is ongoing work, and in the next couple of weeks we will come with a lot more information. There's already been quite a lot of interest in the expressions of interest that we put out last week, and we will come back to you maybe next week with a more updated list of who expressed interest and what are the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumya. Now I'd like to hand the floor to Dr. Mariangela Simao, ADG for Access to Medicines and Health Products. Again, very well known to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We have the next slide. This is just a brief summary. You notice we had 3 rounds of the allocation. The allocation mechanism is managed, was presented to member states last year, and it's managed by WHO and Gavi. We had a first round with the Pfizer, a small number of doses from Pfizer, and Dr. Soumya just referred to this 1.2 million doses. The finalization of the deliveries is happening only now, so it's a complex delivery to manage. We had the allocation round 2, where we allocated 237 million doses from AstraZeneca, SII, and SK Bio, and we are allocated this to 142 participants. We are having problems with supply that Dr. Soumya has referred to, and we just published the allocation round 3 for Pfizer, 14 million doses, 47 participants. And let me announce here that we are planning by mid-May to launch the new allocation round that will take into account the doses that were not delivered for the AstraZeneca doses, the SII Bio. The 4th allocation round will include the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So it will be run with Pfizer, new doses, with AstraZeneca doses, J&J. So this is the plan now for next round, which will happen in mid-May. It's if we secure supplies for Novavax, which is still uncertain, before the next allocation round goes, we will run an allocation specific for Novavax. Next. Now, very briefly here, let me just say that We have expanded on Friday the AstraZeneca emergency use listing to include other nodes that are in Europe mainly, which will allow for the facility to receive the donation of doses that come from AstraZeneca in Europe. We have now next week, the process is a process where the company have to express interest and then they submit a dossier for WHO. When WHO deems it's ready, sometimes we need to do an inspection locally. We did inspect the facilities in China for both Sinovac and Sinopharm. We then submitted dossier for assessment of an external expert group. So Monday, 26th, the external expert group will be assessing for the listing of Sinopharm Beijing. Remember that there are two Sinopharms, one in Beijing and Wuhan. Sinopharm Beijing and Moderna will be assessing. We're still missing some data, but we have a team already in Russia doing the inspections for the good clinical practices together with the European Medicines Agency. And then we have a series of inspections for the good manufacturing practices that are planned for May in early June. And let me say that these dates were established by the manufacturers as they will be ready by then. So we are expecting to assess Gamaleya, which is the Sputnik V or Sputnik 5. We're expecting to have the final assessment for listing end of June or in July. As Dr. Sune also mentioned, we do have 4 other vaccines where the companies have expressed interest. So this is very, very important that you know, because we have Novavax, which is part of the COVAX facility portfolio. But we also have already received the expression of interest from Bharat, the Covaxin in India, and from CureVac, which is the other mRNA vaccine that's produced by Bayer in Germany. And we also have received an expression of interest from BioCuba Pharma. Still the dates to be assessed have to be determined. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Angela. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Kate O'Brien, Director of Immunisation, Vaccine and Biologicals. Kate, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd like to just go through the update from SAGE. Considerable attention worldwide in the media on rare safety events that have prompted regulatory and policy reviews of the AstraZeneca vaccines. And I want to just provide an update here. So from both the UK and the EMA regulatory authorities, there have been several reviews that have been done, and the overview of the messages are that these thrombotic events with low platelet counts, with thrombocytopenia, are very rare events, potential causal links to the vaccine. However, the EMA has confirmed an overall benefit-risk remains positive, and the same sort of statement from MHRA. The EMA has resulted in an update to the product information leaflet, which is in the sections around warnings and precautions for use and undesirable effects. And they will continue to assess updated data as data continue to come in. In parallel with that, the WHO Safety Committee, the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety, met on April 16th and issued a statement having reviewed not only the European data, but also the global data from outside of Europe on these events. The biological mechanism for this syndrome is still being investigated, and what cannot be ruled out is whether or not any of these events may be related not just to a single vaccine, but to also other vaccines using the same platform. So GACS has been clear about their assessment of the safety data and continues to work with all countries to review those data. From a policy perspective, some countries have adjusted their policies to recommend using either an age-specific or in some cases a preference on application of the vaccines by gender. Some countries have also reversed their policies or adjusted them, so we appreciate that this has been a very dynamic time for countries. Now, SAGE has reviewed all of these data and has updated the interim recommendations that were previously issued, and the update is based on the safety review by GACS and includes other updates. So if we go to the next slide, I'll first just comment also on the Janssen vaccine, and then I'll go to the specific update from SAGE. So Janssen, as you know, is also a product that is of a similar platform using the viral vector platform. And both the US FDA and US CDC together have paused the use of the Janssen vaccine in the US while a full safety assessment is going on of a similar set of events, safety events, these thrombotic thrombocytopenic syndrome. The EMA has also reviewed and has confirmed an overall benefit risk remaining very positive, and has provided also an update to the product information leaflet as I described for the AstraZeneca product. From a WHO safety perspective, the GACS committee will continue to monitor and assess the evolution of data from all countries. And we've noted from a policy perspective that a limited set of countries, very limited, have paused the rollout while these evaluations are going on. A limited set also, very limited, has adjusted their policy use to specify some age criteria. And WHO SAGE is monitoring and assessing the evolution of all of these data and the regulatory decisions. So a dynamic space on the Janssen vaccine. Next slide. I'm going to skip this slide because since we put the slides together, we have in fact finalized the recommendations. So we'll remove that slide. So SAGE has issued an updated set of interim policy recommendations on the AstraZeneca product, but including the SII source of the product and the AstraZeneca manufacturing sites. There are no substantial changes in the policy. The overall recommendations remain the same. The benefits of these vaccines largely outweigh the risks. The latest data that is now available, we have more data that allows greater precision in the language on the recommendations and the characterization of risks. So those are where the most updates are being made in the recommendation. And specifically, we are clear that the products of the chimp adeno Oxford vaccine are considered equivalent and interchangeable regardless of where the manufacturing site is. We have substantially more data on efficacy and effectiveness in people over 65 years of age, so confirming the benefit of the product in the older age group. Thirdly is an operational issue, which is that open vaccine vials should be maintained at a refrigerated temperature during the use period, which was not previously specified. And the text on the precautions now includes specific reference to this thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome that is this very rare event that seems to be associated with the use of the vaccine in very rare circumstances. Next slide, please. So I also want to provide one more update, which is the COVID-19 Partners Platform. Next slide. And many of you are familiar with the platform. The member states can, this is the platform that has been used for all of the COVID-19 response. And the vaccine component is part of the platform now, and member states can upload resource needs to the Partners Platform in the coming weeks. So the context really is that the vaccination campaigns we know require very significant financial resources for operational needs and vaccine purchase. And to contribute to the funding of these campaigns, donors need to have a clear view on what the resources are that member states have. So from April 30th, member states will have the opportunity to upload their resource needs onto the Partners Platform, and this can then be used as a tool to have discussions with ministers of finance, ministries of health, immunization partners, donors, and other stakeholders. And so we provide the link here. Many member states have already uploaded their national deployment vaccination plans onto the partners platform. So the needs part of this is opening, and we see that the third component would be the actual resources. So there are two ways to upload the needed resources. You can upload the Civic tool, Excel spreadsheet, which is a costing tool that we've provided to all member states, or use a manual drop-down menu. Next slide, please. And there are 4 reasons why uploading member state needs onto the platform is important. First, the preparation plan and cost needs associated with the vaccination campaign. We have released this new version 2.1 of the COVID vaccine introduction and deployment costing tool, the so-called Civic tool. The second is it helps identify the gaps between the country plan needs and the existing resources. The third reason to upload onto the platform is it gains access to transparent donor information to help mobilize resources globally, and it informs discussions with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health, and the partners, donors, and other stakeholders. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Katie O'Brien and to all the colleagues who've spoken. That's our last speaker, so we'll now move to question and answer. And I look to my colleague, Mr. Judah Syed, today's moderator. Jude, over to you, please, to moderate the question and answer.
Thank you very much, Chair. I recognize Japan to be followed by New Zealand. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thanks to WHO and colleagues for the briefing. I wanted to mention one event that Japan is co-hosting. Last week, there was a event entitled One World Protected event regarding the raising additional funding for AMC hosted by the US and Gavi. At that meeting last week, Foreign Minister Motegi announced that Japan will co-host, along with Gavi, a Gavi COVAX AMC summit sometime in June. And this is an important meeting to raise the funding for additional doses of COVID-19 vaccines. So we hope active participation by members. Japan's position on the vaccine is that we will do our best to support COVAX AMC. We have already provided $200 million to COVAX AMC in the spirit of leaving no one's health behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. I should now invite New Zealand. You have the floor, please.
Prime Minister Ardern was very pleased to announce at the One World Protected event last week that New Zealand will donate vaccines sufficient to cover the needs of 800,000 people in developing countries, including in the Pacific region. We see dose sharing as a key part of the equitable access picture through increasing vaccine supply globally and accelerating access for vulnerable populations. Where countries have extra doses, the COVAX facility provides an efficient and equitable way to share doses with others. We look forward to seeing further progress in that space and working collectively on this problem going ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. New Zealand, I recognize France. You have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you once again for that excellent presentation. I just wanted to echo what all colleagues have already stated. France supports fully all these issues regarding buildup of production capacity, and we are eager to see the first results. We want to congratulate WHO because we know that they are excellent at coordinating efforts with other partners to reach the stated goals. And we're pleased that Emmanuel Macron will attend tomorrow's event on the one-year anniversary of the ACT Accelerator, and will be able to announce further news regarding vaccine donation mechanisms. We need to take action immediately, and this needs to include all countries, especially those that benefited from doses in a bilateral way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I recognize Egypt. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Jude, and I would like to thank all the people who gave good co-vaccine and distribution of vaccines. My question is regarding the what's been announced by Dr. Sumi and Sominatun about the some countries has announced the hubs, as I remember. My question is, how can there any procedures in this regard has been taken, according to my understanding, in the of formulating the idea yet? So how countries could present their interests in most? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Egypt. I do not see any further requests for the floor, so I yield to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jude, and thank you to Japan, New Zealand and France and those announcements and information very well noted. We did have a question from Egypt, which I think was directed to our Chief Scientist, Dr. Soumya. If I can hand to you, Soumya, to respond to that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to all the member states who spoke, and particularly Japan, New Zealand and France for the announcements that you made. Regarding the question from Egypt, the expression of interest basically outlines the two kinds of expressions that we are looking for. One is from the owners of the technology, of the mRNA platforms. So they could be companies, they could be academics, universities. We need to hear from them as to what their technology is and how willing they are to share that expertise and know-how, and to participate in really building up a hub for technology transfer. The other call to recipient companies, obviously located within member states, but essentially we would be looking, I think we would like to discuss with you if there is interest, because as I mentioned, we will have a set of criteria very soon against which we will we'll have to assess, because there is a huge amount of interest, you can imagine, but it's not that easy to set up a manufacturing capacity in a place which doesn't have any previous experience or underlying infrastructure and expertise. So we will develop a set of criteria and come back to you. There are 2 email IDs that are provided in that expression of interest of staff who can provide further information. So if there's interest, I suggest that you please reach out to them, or you can reach out to me, and we will answer your questions more specifically. But by next week, we should be able to come with much more detail on what we would be looking for. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Soumya. I'm just going to check in one more time with our moderator, Jude, to confirm if there are no further indications of member states wishing to take the floor. That's so confirmed, in which case I will ask the Director General to make his closing remarks for this session. Dr. Tedros.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency, Minister Vardhan, Excellencies Ministers, Excellencies colleagues, ambassadors and other representatives. First of all, thank you so much for joining us, for your inputs and for your guidance. And second, I just would like to say a few words on the vaccine issue. It has been said before, but I just wanted to stress so you can see how difficult the situation is and how challenging the situation is, especially in terms of vaccine equity. As you know, 910 million vaccine doses have been distributed so far. And this is globally administered, and 83% of which is administered in high and upper middle income countries. Low income countries, it's 0.3%. Then I'll give you another figure. We said 41 million doses of vaccine have been distributed to 118 countries. And this covers, this is the 41 million doses to 118 countries, only 0.5% of their combined population of more than 4 billion. And as you know, some countries have already vaccinated more than 30 or 40% of their population, at least single dose, I mean the first dose. You can see the divide. I think we can do better than this. And I just wanted to remind you the figures. Of course, COVAX is doing its best, but unless we get vaccines, I think the gap will continue to widen. Sonia had already said it earlier. We were supposed to distribute around 100 million doses by now, but we did only 40 million, so it's like 40% of which. But even if we distributed 100 million, still in terms of coverage, it's low. So we need to take it seriously, and I would like to appreciate the organizers of the summit, One World Protected. I hope this will give more support, and I'm glad that Japan will be hosting the next one. And thank you also to New Zealand and France and also Norway for the doses that you have already decided to share. So the solution will be, especially in the short term, to increase coverage of vaccinations in low-income countries, and also to start in those countries where vaccination has not actually started. We need to push on sharing doses of vaccines. If we don't do that, then there will be countries who will not stop, who haven't started and who will not start. But at the same time, those who have started will not be able even to give the booster dose to those who have already started. So I would like to be very candid with you. Although COVAX shows that it can work, but because of several reasons, I don't want to take your time going into the lists of the challenges. What we have done compared to what should happen, or what we have done compared to what's happening in high-income countries, is nothing. Nothing. And we have to be serious. Even when we have money, we can't get access to vaccines. So donation in terms of funding, we appreciate it, but unless that's translated into having vaccines, even the money itself will not be useful. So I am being honest with you, because 0.5% is not acceptable. It's not. And we have to do better. We have to do more. And I know it's in our hands to change the tide, to be honest. It is. And you know, with variants now spreading, even the vaccines we have may not be effective. And even countries who have made progress in vaccinating a big percent of their population may be affected again. So that's why we have been saying repeatedly, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So there is progress, but that progress is really little. We appreciate your support, but the support is still too small. And you can see it from the widening gap, which is really keeping actually widening every single day. So thank you so much again for your inputs and for attending today's session, and see you in our upcoming session. I hope you will take our message really seriously. To be honest, we're very, very worried, and there is a good mechanism, but the mechanism is not being used and being undermined by several factors, and we need to be serious. Thank you so much, and see you in our next week session. Thank you. Talk to you, Jane.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros, for those thought-provoking final remarks. And with that, we bring today's session to a close. Wish you good day, good evening. Thank you for your attendance. And we will see you at next week's session. Thank you.